Hi, I'm Carys.
And I'm Gary Younge.
Every week, Gary and I will be talking about those stories in the news that are overreported and the ones that are going completely under the radar and not being talked about enough. This is Over the Top, Under the Radar.
This episode is sponsored by Jacaranda Books.
How are you doing, Gary?
I'm a little bit ill. How about you? How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm also I'm at the end of a cold. I refuse to be sick another day. We basically recorded the last podcast. I caught a cold. I'm very grumpy about it. You can probably still hear it a bit in my voice. But like the West African auntie that I am inside, I've been drinking a lot of fresh ginger tea. But I did want to ask you about something that I don't think it's going to come up in the overs and unders. It was the Oscars. Any reactions to the Oscar fashion?
To Oscar fashion?
Yeah, did you check out the red carpet? No. Have a very dear friend. We used to, he now has, like a grown-up job and kids, but after every big red carpet thing, we do a sort of detailed WhatsApp or email back in the day review of everyone's dresses. There's a brilliant person I follow on Instagram who's a journalist who does perfectly sarky and snarky takes on all the dresses. I just wondered if we could do a bit of that. Have you seen any of the fits from the Oscars?
I must have seen them, Carys. I must have seen them. And that is about as much interest as I invested in.
Okay. Well, I know you're big into fashion.
Yes. Yes, I am. Yeah.
I would check out Timothée Chalamet just to see if it's maybe a bit of spring inspo for you.
Really?
He went for a pale yellow suit, no tie. You know who Timothée Chalamet is, right?
Yes, I do. But are you suggesting that might suit me?
Yeah. Yellow suits black people, notorious for it.
Okay.
We look great in yellow. I might go for a more sunshine yellow than he's gone for. I mean, well, generally I would say the red carpet was pretty underwhelming. People aren't taking risks anymore other than the men. It's the men who've really been
interesting
out here. Yeah. So with the more interesting suits, a lot of black and white dresses among the women. Have to make a notable exception for the wonderful Cynthia Erivo. We love black and British in Wicked. She's wearing a dress that's the width of 3 humans. We love to see it. I'm going to get you into the fashion because we're in award season, Gary. So for the next big red carpet, I'm going to send you a link so that we can read.
I'm up for learning. I can do snark and commentary just like the next person. And
I know you can.
I'm assuming that it's a bit like football where you don't have to be any good at football in order to commentate on football. And so the fact that I am dressed like a dustbin doesn't matter because I'm just commenting on what other people are wearing. Have you ever been on a red carpet?
Yes, but not for anything fancy. I bet you've been on a real one.
When I have, I've been to a couple of premiere. It's the fastest I go. I was going to say I'm a blur, but I'm really not a blur because I don't move that fast. But I'm don't look at me. Don't look at me. There's somebody dressed as a bloody swan coming straight afterwards. Yeah, I'll be walking on my half iron trousers with the hem hanging out.
You don't pop a hip?
No.
Girl.
I might throw my hip out. That's not the same thing, is it?
So we had a work event at my old job it must be nearly 18 months ago now. There was a red carpet there for the influencers and people. But obviously I worked with a lot of Gen Zs. So they were we've also got to go on the red carpet and take pictures. Let me tell you, Gary, this generation, they know their angles. They know how to take pictures. They're popping hips, angling their jaws so it looks like their cheekbones are cut glass. They're just so good at it. And then they told me how to pose. And I now have quite a few good pictures of me in front of a step and repeat. Yeah, because of the younger generations, Gary. They're really across it. I mean, obviously there's a huge downside in terms of the high levels of economic insecurity and anxiety derived from spending so much time on social media and the collapse of the economy. But very good videographers and photographers would be my takeaway from that.
I would prefer a Soul Train dance line to a red carpet. Just something where people get to move a little bit, do something with it, as opposed to walk, twirl, all of those things that you said, hip and chin and all that kind of stuff.
If one of us had have a film out, it
Yeah,
could happen.
that's what we.
That's what we'll get going. Soul Train
Yeah.
dance time. Best Foot Music, good name, have said, we're big fans of Over Under Pod, Gary Younge and Carys. This week, this post on Resistance came by their mailing list. It very much represents our view. Do check them out. Highly recommended. Yes, I'm assuming the Resistance thing is related to the book that you have helped to make.
Yeah, and to Steve McQueen's exhibition in Margate. You can find us all over socials, be it Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, or X at over_under_pod_. This episode is sponsored by Jacaranda Books, one of the UK's longest-running black-owned publishers of fiction and non-fiction for adults and young adults, primarily written by black authors. Like us, Valerie Branders saw the need for better representation of diverse voices, and 14 years ago, she founded Jacaranda Books, creating a powerful space for those voices to shine.
Today, they boast an incredible selection of globally acclaimed, award-winning titles available wherever good books are sold. As a special offer, you can shop at Jacaranda's website and enjoy an exclusive 30% discount with the code OTTUTR30 at checkout. That's OTTUTR30 at checkout.
Support Black publishing and discover your next great read with Jacaranda Books. The code OTTUTR30 at checkout. Today, I want to talk about settler violence on the West Bank and what do we mean when we say we want peace. How about you, Carys?
I want to talk about Trump's State of the Union and who is funding British MPs. My over the top for this week is Trump's State of the Union address. For those of you who have not had a TV screen or a phone or just any device connected to the internet or the outside world open in the past few days, as is tradition, President Trump addressed both houses of Congress in his State of the Union address. There were a few notable moments. A member of Congress was kicked out for heckling. There were a few dodgy jokes. Trump referred to the Israel-Palestine conflict and the Middle East in general as a rough neighborhood. Generally just the sort of usual chaos and crackpot energy that is kind of inherent to President Trump. So the reason this went over the top for the week is I think that the media have gone like a little bit too far in covering this. And indeed, part of me feels like there wasn't that much to cover. So for those who haven't been following the coverage, there's been a lot of, oh my God, this is so sinister, him and JD Vance. So first of all, the State of the Union is and has always been, or at least in modern history, whilst cameras have been in the Capitol building, it's the definition of political theatre. This is an event where people count the applause lines. Yes, Trump's speech was incredibly long, like more than an hour and a half, the longest State of the Union that, we've had, at least going back to LBJ, so like back into the 60s. He's not the only one who liked a long State of the Union, though. Bill Clinton gave pretty long speeches. Like, there are multiple presidents who also spoke for more than an hour. And so if you believe that Trump is a fascist or a proto-fascist or an authoritarian, none of which I'm disputing, you can easily spin everything he says and does as sinister. But in terms of the actual events of the speech, one of the congressmen, a man called Al Green, not that Al Green, heckled Trump about Medicaid and was eventually evicted from the Capitol building, kicked out. Heckling's not new. Biden got heckled a ton. Marjorie Taylor Greene heckled Biden in a MAGA cap. At Trump's first State of the Union, Democrats didn't really applaud him. This time he called them out for it and was like, oh, you're not clapping. He said a load of wild stuff. He always says a load of wild stuff. He called Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas. Unnecessary, but not the first time he's done it. He contradicted himself in the speech. So, for example, when he talked about Greenland, he was like, to the people of Greenland, if you want to get on the train, we'd love you to be part of America. And then by the end of that series of couplets, he's like, but come what may, Greenland will be part of America. It's easy to take everything that Trump does and say, this is this like dramatic thing that's so crazy. And I think this was just the regular order of craziness. And I think in terms of like the political theatre of the State of the Union, not that unique.
I mean, when I was there, I used to hate having to cover the State of the Union for precisely this reason. It's like, well, what do you think they're going to say? Do you know what I mean? And, at a certain point, regardless of whether the whole place is falling apart around your ears, I remember one where Clinton was in the middle of the Lewinsky thing, and then they always have to say, the State of the Union is strong. And I always think that anything like conventions, like conferences here, anything that is set up in no small part for the media. I know this is part of the legislative calendar, but if it's set up for the media, then the media shouldn't go. Or you get the theatre correspondent to write about it because that's what it is. This is a week where we've had that car crash, Zelensky press conference. They've withdrawn military aid from Ukraine. They've stopped the cyber cooperation and all of that. There's enough. He's doing enough stuff that when it comes to the set pieces, maybe we can tone it down a bit. If he's just doubling down on the crazy, he's just saying different crazy things, but in a suit, not for golf. I mean, you have to record it, but maybe we don't have to go over the top. We have to pace ourselves with this guy. Otherwise, we're going to get worn out.
There is a lot about this Trump administration and about Trump generally that is sinister. I don't know that this State of the Union is like one of the key pieces of evidence, which brings me to the Democratic response to the State of the Union. So, and you'll know this better than me because you've covered multiple of these. Part of the tradition is there's a response to the State of the Union from the like non-governing political party. So it was Elisa Slotkin, I believe is the name of the senator for Michigan, gave a reaction speech, 10 minutes in Michigan, flags behind her. Like it was a perfectly good 10-minute speech that sounded like it had been well focus grouped, but it just made me feel like the Democrats still don't know what they're doing when it comes to Trump. It really was like a Obama, Clinton, Biden, Harris era speech. So first of all, she establishes her credentials. She's the youngest senator. She served her country working for the CIA. She's from the great state of Michigan and Americans are greater together. And it's like, I don't know, it's kind of dull. I'm not saying that an hour and a half of Trump wanging on about the Panama Canal was interesting. In terms of the thing that Trump has that the Democrats don't seem to have a response to, it's there was no Riz, Gary, It was not a Rizzy reaction. And most people are going to have switched it off. She even said oh, it doesn't matter if you don't know me or if you're not interested. And it's babe, you got nothing to lose. Go hell for leather on Elon Musk, call him a liar, say that he's stealing money. I don't know. It's just there was nothing popping out from the speech, and maybe they're soft launching her as a potential presidential candidate. And so maybe it was just about giving her visibility, but it still feels like years, nearly a decade into Trump exploding onto the political stage. It still feels like the Democrats just don't have a counterpunch.
My over the top, I want to talk about peace. And obviously, peace is a great thing. I want it for everybody. But particularly with Ukraine and Gaza, they keep talking about peace deals without actually telling you what's in the deal. So then you get this weird situation where Russia is the aggressor. Then America accuses Zelensky of not wanting peace. Actually, the issue is on what terms. Similarly, in Gaza, where the ceasefire deal has now run its course, and the question arises, well, do you want peace? It's well, on what basis? Now, the American basis with Ukraine is a bit of a shakedown. I mean, at one stage, Trump initially demanded that Ukraine pay $500 billion in potential revenue to repay America for its aid. And Zelensky just said, I'm not doing that. I'm not signing something that 10 generations of Ukrainians will have to be paid. And so then Trump's okay, well, then give us some of your stuff. Ukraine has lithium, lanthanum, cerium, the latter two used in TVs and lighting, neodymium, which is used in wind turbines, erbium and yttrium, I think it's pronounced. The applications used for nuclear power. It is rich in minerals. And America's saying, all right, we're going to go 50-50 on a fund out of your minerals. And because we have a stake in it, we will secure that. We're not going to provide you with general security. We're just going to provide you with security for the stuff that we are looting. And
yeah, I mean, he's kind of trying to run a protection racket, right?
yeah. And then Europe, on the other hand, have said, Zelensky said, look, I need 200,000 troops to sustain a ceasefire. And Europe's like, yeah, we ain't got the numbers. We got less than a third of that. I know Starmer's talking big in terms of boots on the ground, but the truth is that the European Union and European states have been writing checks with their diplomatic mouths that they cannot cash with their militaries. Zelensky finds himself, the peace that he would like is one where, of course, Ukraine is secure and sovereign and so on. But if you just say peace without kind of talking about, well, what do they want out of the peace, then it is a very difficult thing to track. Similarly, with Gaza, the first period of the ceasefire expired in March the 1st. We now have this peace, quote unquote, and some of this will be in my under the radar in terms of the West Bank. But we have this peace where the Israelis and the Palestinians have more or less kept to most of the rules regarding the first stage of the ceasefire. Now, the Israelis are saying, right, we are going to stop all medical aid and food and sustenance going into Gaza in order to force you to do stage 2, which they're still in negotiations with. It's very difficult to negotiate when you are starving and when your people are starving. And it speaks once again to the peace that will reign. I say this because, for two reasons. First, I do think that the media is talking about these peace deals without actually connecting it to what the deal is. The second is that I'm used to this from when there are riots and people say, go home, we must have calm. And it's like, well, what was the situation when there was calm? If the situation was that black people were more likely to be shot by the cops, more likely to be poor, more likely to have infant mortality, more likely to have maternal mortality. Well, that's not very calm. It doesn't make me feel calm. So what is the nature of the peace if you don't like the war? Who is paying for the peace? And can there be peace without justice? Trump thinks this is all just like deals that you're making. You make a deal with the Palestinians in which Gaza still doesn't have access to all the things that it needs, that's not going to be much of a peace. And so something will erupt out of that you won't like. We're here for a reason. And so just saying peace and this person does want peace or this person doesn't want peace without talking about what that peace would involve, I think is a dereliction of the media's responsibility.
I'm not going to lie, when you said you thought that your over the top was peace, I was intrigued as to where you were going with it, but you landed it well. Yeah, it's a good over. And I think, I think it's interesting, the threads between Ukraine and Palestine. Seeing Zelensky be berated by Trump and JD Vance of like, well, don't you want peace? Like, says you want peace. And it's like the person that got invaded, like, yeah, I'm pretty sure he doesn't want Russian tanks on his lawn. I'm a socialist. I don't know if I'm a pacifist because, I think peace can be used in the way you've described as this sort of motherhood and apple pie, like fairness. It's like, well, what peace on whose terms? Especially no one wants bombs raining down or bullets flying. Like, that's not a good state of affairs. The price of peace, or what peace actually means for people living in Ukraine, in Palestine, it's pretty important to be across the details of that. The other thing that we know from areas that have been in prolonged conflict, whether it's like in Northern Ireland, in South Africa, in Cote d'Ivoire and Sudan, it's also that like peace is a process. Like, it's not an end point. It's not a thing. It's not a deal everyone signs and everyone shakes hands. And actually, that's where we need the media more than ever to be like, have the tanks actually gone? Were the hostages released? Did people surrender their arms? Yeah, it suits politicians for peace to just be like a binary thing. Well, do you want peace or not? But it's on journalists to dig into what we mean by peace and like whose peace. And I think that's going to become very geopolitically important in the next few years. Having peace in various countries and parts of the world is going to be something we're hearing about more rather than less. So it actually is more important than ever that journalists are able to interrogate that term and like hold people to account, right? Which is like part of the job.
And within that, I think the question of, well, is this peace sustainable? That the Oslo Accords were supposed to provide a sustainable peace, and they clearly didn't. There is a peace where somebody beats somebody else into a pulp, and then while they are lying on the floor, they say, right, we can have peace now. Well, the person who's been beaten to a pulp still needs to recover. And secondly, let's assume that they're not going to be overwhelmingly happy with the state of affairs where they are on the ground beaten to a pulp and the other person standing over them. There's more to peace than there just not being war. And there's more to war than just bullets flying. We have a big shout out to the people who joined us on Patreon recently. Big list. Ben, Tansy, Jelly. If I get these names wrong, I'm sorry. Marix, the Reviews Chick, Nick, Viv, Lara, Nikita, Fabiana, Joan, Richard, Connor, Hannah, Steve, Holly, Yasin, Heather, and Joe. We have 455 Patreon supporters, of which 425 of you are fully fledged payers. So thank you so much. Carys, the team, and I make this podcast because we believe there's an audience out there of people just like us. That's people who are comfortable with left-wing perspectives and humour and chat, talking about news, global affairs, and popular culture.
Myself and Gary and the small Black-owned production company behind the podcast, very small, very mini, there's only a few of us, and a lot of us aren't paid for what we do at the moment. Because our values matter to us, we don't want to take random adverts from any corporate sponsor. We only want to partner with organisations whose values align with ours. So it's your contributions, it's the people who sign up to donate every week, even if it's just £5, that help to keep the podcast going and keep it alive and make sure we can pay as many people as possible involved.
So if you enjoy the pod and find value in what we do, please consider donating if you can afford it. The packages start at just £5 plus VAT a month. And if you already donate, please consider upgrading your membership.
If you support us on Patreon, you get some extra stuff. So you get the podcast episode, bonus episodes, even more of Gary and I talking. You get a weekly newsletter and you get access to the exclusive over the top, under the radar WhatsApp community, which is basically like a safe space for people who listen to the podcast to talk about their lives, politics. The podcast is a community. There are a lot of people like you that like it, and it's a chance to connect with them.
Yeah, so basically meet like-minded people through us. Search Over the Top, Under the Radar on Patreon, and please put your money where your ears are. My Under the Radar, and like most Under the Radars, it's been going on for a while, which is the West Bank in the Middle East. Palestine's West Bank, which isn't run by Hamas, but run by the Fatah faction of what was the PLO. The West Bank, where attacks weren't launched against Israel on October the 7th, has been coming under an increasing barrage of violence from the Israeli military, from settlers. Now, those, generally speaking, are two different things. The Israeli military occupies the West Bank, and then there are settlements, overwhelmingly, if not all of them, illegal by international law, some of them illegal even by Israeli law, which have sprung up all around the West Bank and Gaza. And one of the things that's changed is because of October the 7th, many settlers have been recruited into the army. And so then they are coming back with military vibes and with a military weight into the settlements. And so you have people who, for the time being, are soldiers leading this violence. There are about 500,000 people who live in the West Bank settlements. Joe Biden had very belatedly sanctioned some of the settlers. Trump, when he came in, immediately or almost immediately relieved those sanctions, so gave the green light for people to carry on as settlers. There've been, since October the 7th, between October the 7th and late December, there were at least 1,860 incidents of settler violence in the occupied West Bank. This is the West Bank, not Gaza. This is the area of the Palestinian Authority that the Israelis are supposed to somewhat be able to be getting on with. Most of them in Nablus, but also in Rablah, Hebron. I know Jenin has taken an awful beating. And here's the reality, was that 2023 was already, before October the 7th, was already a pretty bad year for settler violence. So why is this important? Well, first of all, because it helps us, or should help us, I think, shift the narrative so that, yes, October the 7th was a major inflection point in this conflict. And I don't mean inflection point to minimize it at all. It was horrific murders took place. And this shows that while it was an inflection point, there was an October the 6th. These things were happening in October the 6th. It also shows that, yes, there is a problem in Gaza, and yes, there's a problem with Hamas, but the issue in this area is not limited to Gaza, and it's not limited to Hamas. And finally, that we do not have a good faith actor in Israel. Now, we can establish Hamas is not a good faith actor either. That's why it is designated as a terror organization in Britain and the rest of the world. So it's not that we are overrun with people that we can trust in that area, but there is some sense that Hamas is a terror organization and somehow Israel isn't. And when we put what is going on in Gaza together with what is going on with the West Bank, we can see why peace has been so elusive, in part. And we can talk once again about, well, what peace do we want? Do we want a peace where these illegal settlements by international law continue? Do we want a peace where individual Israelis can just take Palestinian land and terrorize their families and their children and shoot at people and so on? Is that the peace that we want?
I agree with a lot of what you said. And I want to talk a little bit for those who, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are very well informed about Palestine and the Middle East, but I think it's important to have in your head a visual of the West Bank and Gaza. Gaza is a strip of land, like a thin, narrow strip of land that has, I don't even think it's an open air prison at this point with what's going on. The West Bank is a much larger expanse of land that doesn't connect with Gaza, that in 1967, with a United Nations Security Council resolution, so this is a unanimous binding resolution, Resolution 242, which was passed in 1967, that required Israel to retreat from the expansion it had done in the Six-Day War behind defined borders. And those borders that denote what would be a Palestinian state if we had two states in that region are around the West Bank and Gaza. And what's happened in the West Bank over decades with settlers is incredibly clever and incredibly sinister, which is that Israel hasn't put tanks over the border, it's put people and houses and buildings, so that even though, legally speaking, in terms of international law, this is Palestinian territory, in order to enforce the borders of the Palestinian state, you will have to evict ordinary people with their families and their homes. When you hear on social media or, in print, the idea of Israel as a settler colonial nation, this really is the heart of that project. And you can get an Airbnb in the West Bank. I was involved in a campaign where we asked Airbnb to stop listing properties in the West Bank, which they did briefly do. But as far as I'm aware, if you want, you can get yourself a villa in the West Bank. It's important to not let what's happening on the West Bank go under the radar, but also to understand the political project it's part of like blurring the lines of what is a clear border legally and having a bunch of people with their kids and their families there. So it's like, well, you're going to evict all of these people. And it's unsurprisingly, suddenly the West Bank has also been drawn into the conflict. And I think Netanyahu and this Israeli state are not a good faith actor. So we shouldn't really even bother to hold them to what they claim they're doing. But there is no rationale for expanding the conflict to the West Bank. And yeah, I guess it's all out war, right? So my under the radar is, have you heard of an organization called My Society?
No.
Great. Okay. Already under the radar. Have you heard of a website called They Work For You?
Yes.
So They Work For You is a website that lets you scrutinize politicians, specifically mostly MPs. You can look up speeches they've given. You can look up how they voted on things. And it's run by an organization called My Society. So a small British charity that works on democracy and accountability. This week, it didn't get a lot of press, but the folks at My Society have produced a new report and some new functionality to They Work For You called Who Funds Them? So stay with me because we're about to get nerdy. All MPs have to submit their financial interests via the Register of Members' Interests. They have to tell you a certain amount of information about, free money they're getting. And it's like, honestly, the Lord's work. And they've done it with 50 volunteers, which just warms my heart. They've trawled through the Register of Members' Interests over years and done a really thorough and comprehensive report about what's wrong with the register. And they've started to pull together based on a couple of key industries, so oil and gas, gambling, non-democratic foreign nations. They've started following the money through MPs' offices. And this hasn't got a ton of press and it's super techie, but I really want to talk about it because there are a few important things I think in a time that can feel a little bit hopeless that should make us hopeful. So the first thing is the report that they've done has shown some really small concrete things we could do to improve the amount of information we're getting about MPs. Given most of our listeners don't want to read a long report about democratic declarations and transparency, basically the forms are crap, Gary. The forms are crap and the MPs don't know how to fill them out. So at the first hurdle, our system is failing because it's not clear how to declare data. Mainstream media organizations have had to issue corrections because they just haven't understood what MPs are declaring. And there's not really an onus on MPs to get it right. So even if all of our MPs were non-corrupt and doing the best that they were, the forms are crap and the data's crap. So these 50 volunteers manually went through submissions to the Registry of Members' Interests. They went onto Companies House. They had to try and cross-reference if MPs were involved in listed companies, which is not easy to do because you need the MP's birthday and that information isn't published by Parliament. So 50 human beings manually crawled through all of this data to produce new information from us about who's funding our representatives and information for Parliament about how they can make reporting better. I think the two things I wanted to say about My Society and the team who funds them is, number one, just really inspiring that 50 human beings, who I assume are nerdy, no offense if you're listening, trawled through all this information, this crappy information, and pulled it together, followed the money to try and find out who is supporting our politicians. And then the second thing is, in an age where we're told everything is going to be automated and to do with machine learning, this is not work that AI could have done. It had to be human beings. And I think that's important because we're constantly being told that, ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever large language model is going to replace all of us. But this sort of painstaking work, spotting threads, seeing a company's name, looking at not just what hospitality are MPs getting, who's paying for staff in their offices, what financial interests do they have? That sort of stuff needs human beings, needs volunteers, investigative journalists. So just want to doff my cap, round of applause to everyone who worked on this report. And there are a couple of things that I think it's worth us knowing about that shocked me, and I imagine a lot of our listeners won't know. So the first thing is, if you're an MP in the British Parliament, you can have £70,000 of shares in a company and not declare them. You can hold crypto, gold, silver. You don't need to tell anyone. So aside from the forms being crap, there are some huge holes in MP funding. And obviously we had it with the Keir Starmer free tickets, free clothes scandal. But the other thing is the hospitality threshold is way too high. So MPs can have hospitality, and as long as it doesn't cost more than £300, they don't have to declare it. So as long as it's £295, no need to tell anyone about it. That covers gig tickets, sporting matches. It's way higher than in the civil service. Civil servants can't do that kind of thing. Why should politicians be able to? And the final thing that I wanted to highlight from the report that is shocking, because even in America, this is not allowed. If you are a lawyer, which many MPs are, you are allowed to continue practicing law as an MP, and you don't have to declare your clients. Gary, this is bananas. Even in America, where companies are allowed to spend insane amounts of money influencing politics, they've recognized that it's a conflict of interest to try and be a lawyer and an elected representative. Keir Starmer, maybe not because he's PM, but any lawyer in the House of Commons can have a bunch of clients, and we have no right to know about them. And I mean, my society recommend, as many people who sort of want more transparency and democracy, some level of state funding. And they're pretty clear that no one likes the idea of state funding for political parties and politics. But the alternative is a system where we let rich people and various different interests subsidize the system. Like either we pay for it or the rich people do. But I just thought it's super nerdy and techie. It's not going to get a ton of press, but it's really important work. And yeah, like sometimes changing the world is like having better forms.
Well, it's a good one. I mean, partly I was stunned. £70,000 in shares before you have to declare. That is twice the median household disposable income. And it speaks to just how out of touch these people are and how out of touch some of these laws are, because you get to that point, and it's a bit like Rishi Sunak's wife and a non-dom thing, where it's like, yeah, what you've done is not illegal, it's just wrong. And if what you're doing is legal and wrong, then obviously you have to change the law. So you have these people raking it in hand over fist. You have an increasingly cynical electorate where turnout is going down. And then you have these kind of major loopholes where even if you were watching them, there is a limit to what you can watch. And they can be representing the BNP, or they could be doing all kinds of things. They could be raking in all kinds of money from various people. And it reminds me of when Hillary Clinton was asked why she took ridiculous amount of money from was one of the banks. And she said, because that's what they offered. You can see this political class that is horribly out of touch. And I like the idea as well, which you've, spent some time on, the fact how this came about. Because people are feeling kind of helpless. What can I do? And blah, blah, blah. And these were, your words, not mine, nerdy people who were driven by the detail and who figured it out for us. It shines a path in terms of like how we're going to have to do it. That we are the ones we've been waiting for. We can't wait for other people to do this stuff. And I also like the sort of somewhat non-partisan nature of like, you know what? The forms are crap. Even if you were doing it right, the forms are crap, the rules are crap. We need an overhaul of the system so that we can trust it.
I think it's still really heartening. Not all of the volunteers wanted to be named publicly that participated in the project, but we'll put a link to the report. And at the end of the report, yeah, they just have an acknowledgement for all of the volunteers. And maybe you're not all nerds. I say nerds with love, but the people who just sat down and followed the money and like looked at the terrible forms. Sometimes everything can feel big and overwhelming, but 50 people rolled up their sleeves and went through a ton of forms and did a load of Googling. And as a result, our democracy is better and stronger. So yeah, that was my under the radar. As we record this, no one has written about it, but you can watch the webinar and read the report should you be interested. And I'm sure that My Society are taking volunteers, and I know that they take donations.
Thanks for listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar, and special thanks to our sponsor, Jacaranda Books. Don't forget to check out the show notes and newsletter and see our special offer. If you shop at Jacaranda's website, you can enjoy an exclusive 30% discount with the code OTTUTR30, which you use at checkout.
Buy some books. Remember to like, subscribe, leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, and you can support the show, help keep it running by searching Over the Top, Under the Radar on Patreon.
You can sign up to our newsletter at overunderpod.com and connect with us on socials at over_under_pod_.
See you next week, guys.